Today's guests are Marco Visconti and Dr. 𝗪𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. We are going to dive into magic. And of course, the influence of Aleister Crowley. This is going to be the definitive guide on how to understand magic in 2025. By the end of this video, you will have an understanding of the effectiveness of magic, what's potentially real and what's not, the role of breath work and meditation in a magic practice, and also the true nature of the siddhis, essentially super or paranormal abilities displayed by humans involved in these sorts of practices. Did ancient or do modern magicians practice blood sacrifice rituals? What are the deepest, darkest secrets potentially held within the upper echelons of our elite class, and much, much more. And our masterclass would not be complete if we didn't grab a perfect understanding of where sex magic lies in all of this. So leave us a like and a review and do all of that stuff. Leave us a comment, because good God, this is a banger podcast, my friends. Enjoy it. We love you. See you soon. Welcome back to the podcast, my good friends. As always, we are always having interesting humans on the podcast. And today we have Marco Visconti, Dr.
Puca.
Puca. Okay, I'm Italian. I mean, I was going to go with Puca. But so listen, many people who are interested in these subjects are already going to be probably very well aware of who you guys are. If you've ever typed anything into YouTube under these subjects, your guys' names are going to pop up. But first, we'll just get a good understanding, at least a little bit, of who you guys say that you are and how you've gotten to this point. So, Marco, we'll start with you and go from there.
Sure, Will. First of all, thank you for having me, and good to see you, Andrew, again. We've been doing a lot of things together over the course of the years. My name is Marco Visconti. I'm an author. I wrote the Aleister Crowley manual in 2 years ago, and now at the end of the year, so in November 2025, my second book for Watkins Publishing is coming out. It's called Aleister Crowley's Mysticism. I guess you can get the gist. I'm speaking about Aleister Crowley. I like to write about Aleister Crowley and Thelema. I've been interested in the esoteric and the occult my entire life. I was a member of Ordo Templi Orientis, not anymore. I'm still an aspirant of the AA, which is one of the magical orders that Crowley founded, and been in and out multiple things. I'm a Freemason, and I've been a musician in a previous life, as I like to say. Like in my 20s and 30s, I was a touring musician, and that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome, Angela.
As for me, I'm an academic. I'm a religious studies PhD and a university lecturer, and I have a project of online dissemination of academic knowledge called 𝗪𝗟𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. The channel that I'm particularly proud of is my YouTube channel, but you also find me on TikTok, Instagram, and all other social media platforms. But I particularly like YouTube because it allows for breadth and length of knowledge, so that you can really dive deep into things, as opposed to other social media platforms that are very quick and easy and more based on a specific aesthetic and punchy things. And I don't prefer them. I use them because it's kind of necessary, but I don't prefer them. So on my platforms, I cover the academic study of esotericism, including Thelema, because I just thought, as I was doing my PhD, that there was a field that was a bit missing. That there were practitioners talking about esotericism from a practitioner's point of view, but there wasn't really much in terms of now there is a bit more, obviously, but it is still quite underrepresented, I would say. So I really believe that it's also important to understand the academic side and what peer-reviewed scholarship is telling us about these very interesting traditions. So that's the kind of perspective that I contribute with.
Excellent. Yeah. And like I said before we started filming, I have seen both of your guys' work, and I appreciate all of it. And I think the place where I would like to get us going, which I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, one place where I'd like to start, let me grab this right here. Now, I will give my small spiel. I'm by no means an expert. However, if I were to look at this book here, it says Magic in Theory and Practice. And my understanding that the theme and the idea behind it was to make magic available for everyone. We'll get into a definition of magic right here immediately. However, if I were to just flip to a page and read you guys a sentence, I'm not going to know what in God's name. I realized very quickly you need like 7 scholars at your side to help you dig through what is being said, the symbolism, and all this stuff. So I'll kick it to you, Angela, first for a definition at the very beginning of what is magic. What are we going to be truly talking about here when we talk about magic?
You get the easy one.
Yeah, I got the easy one. Right. So actually, there isn't really a scholarly consensus when it comes to how to define magic. So I suppose that when we talk about magic in the context of Thelema, we have to use as the operative definition, the one that Crowley would use, as opposed to a scholarly definition of magic, which we still don't really have a consensus over, because there are even scholars. I was at King's College in London a couple of weeks ago, and they were having a discussion about things within esotericism, and one of the arguments from one of the scholars was maybe magic is a category that we really shouldn't use as a theoretical tool because it's so difficult to pinpoint and define. And I'm always against this. I think that when definitions are difficult to pinpoint, actually gives us more of a challenge as scholars to get to refine our methodologies and find new ways of understanding things. But anyway, for Crowley, magic was the art and science of causing change in accordance with will. So that is the definition that he would give of magic. And you are correct in saying that Crowley, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that even Professor 𝗪𝗛𝗀 from the University of Amsterdam has identified as one of the reasons why Crowley has become so influential, is because he wanted to democratize magic. So that was definitely an intent. Now, whether it was successful in what you say, because I think that there is a bit this tension in Crowley, because on one end, he wants to democratize magic. On the other hand, he's very much an elitist. So that kind of transpires in the way that he writes and in the way that he comes across. So you're correct in saying that it's not an easy read, and it's not easy to just grab a book by Crowley and know what you have to do to follow that kind of system. It's actually very complex.
Yeah. Marco, do you have any follow-up for that in the definition of magic and any...
I mean, first of all, what Angela said is absolutely correct in the sense that Crowley was torn between this will to, make whatever he was into available to everybody, but is almost impossibility to do so because Crowley's system of magic is essentially tethered to what Thelema is as a magico-philosophical system. And that implies all sorts of categories and all sorts of things that should be studied and practiced as well. Also, the famous definition that Angela just gave us, it's problematic in the sense that, will for Crowley means something very specific, which is the essence of Thelema itself. Thelema is this Greek term that means will, right? But it's a very specific will. It's a sort of divine will. It's a sort of, first of all, it's not something you start with. It's something you discover along the line. So when you actually analyze that definition from a Thelemic standpoint, with Thelemic lenses on, what you realize is that, well, in order to even do magic, in order even to, use this tool, you have to discover your will first. And in order to do that, you have to do all sorts of practices and you have to study all sorts of things that will take you at least a good decade, right? At the very least, right? So Crowley gave other definitions of magic. I mean, even in Magic in Theory and Practice, which, by the way, Magic in Theory and Practice itself is book 3 of a series of like they call it 𝗪𝗟𝗏 or 𝗪𝗟𝗏, that has two other, two first books that actually describe they're called mysticism and magic as in ceremonial magic. And that just gives us also the idea that in order to get to the theory and practice, you have to go through mysticism first, which is really is yoga, and then let's say, learn how to put together an elemental temple and a ceremonial magical temple. He gives other definitions. Another one that I really like, that is not as widely known, it says basically that magic is the art to get in touch with entities that exist on a plane outside of ours. So in many ways, he implies that magic is a tool to get information for, other entities that we might not see and perceive with our direct senses, but they're always there and they're waiting for us to contact so we can actually exchange information. And of course, as you can imagine, this open a lot of possibilities out there. But I'm not surprised when you say that, you open Magic into your practice, like, what is this? Like, it starts very nicely, and then, chapter 3 and 4 is like, I don't know, the mystery of Babylon, the 𝗪𝗡𝗪𝗀𝗧. It's like, what? Why am I supposed to know about this, right?
That's so
And
true.
again, that was because Crowley was really writing to his crowd. Like, he was writing to those who he assumed had the same path as he went through. So like people maybe studied at Cambridge. He never graduated at Cambridge, but he studied at Cambridge. So, we're talking about academics already, right? Or at least like people on the academic path. And then people that maybe went through formal magical instruction, as he did in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Over the course of the last 120 years since Thelema was received in Cairo by Crowley, there's been a lot of attempts to actually democratize Thelema. I mean, that's one of the things I do with my books. And there's been a lot of reactionary approach to that, because a lot of people say, well, you just need to read Crowley. Well, I'm happy to like that you just started with this, because no, like if you're genuinely interested in this, it's not enough to read Crowley. It wasn't enough to read Crowley back then. It's not now, right? Yeah.
𝗪𝗡𝗪𝗀𝗧, the elite private membership club for the modern mystic, exploring powerful teachings on spirituality, self-awareness, ancient wisdom, a deep dive into meditation, mindfulness, and transformational practices designed for those ready to lead their own journey. Are you ready to step up?
Yeah. And so, yeah, that being said, I mean, just to touch on your point, yeah, it's hilarious because you'll start with at the very beginning of the book and you read maybe the first 10, 15 pages, and he's talking about principles, which is a great way to learn.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of giving you this overarching understanding, and then just you fall off a cliff, right? From one page to another, you fall off. He's giving you this general overview, and then now he's deep within symbolism and some understanding that you just don't have, right? And so, with that being said, I think one thing that I find fascinating is clearly he's not someone who, let's say, came up with this. This is a practice that has been within the human psyche and our collective consciousness for quite some time. And so I have actually a very first question, which is out of and he refers to this a lot through the book. I mean, clearly there's references to ancient Egypt, ancient Greek mythology, whatever, even, in some of the Eastern religions as well. Where did this start? Like, where are we to pull kind of like an understanding of how humans stumbled upon this potential for having an effect on their reality or getting in touch with other beings there? Where do you see what form of the ancients has the most effect? I guess it would be my question to you, Marco, first.
So if we're gonna go with what Crowley tells us, Thelema is the resurfacing of the old religion of Sumer, Babylonia, and of Egypt. I'm pretty sure Angela will say, and I agree with her, that's absolutely not true. You gotta like place Crowley in his time, right? So Crowley is writing in the Edwardian period. So Egyptomania is still a big thing. It's still happening. Everybody, especially here and there back then in London, in the UK, crazy about everything Egypt. And so many of these writers, Crowley included, all started with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And I would argue all starting 15 years earlier with the Theosophy and Helena Blavatsky, they were always looking at prime sources in the past to justify whatever they were presenting to their readers and to their followers, to their students, right? So, like, if I could prove, or at least like if I could have a convincing argument that what I'm presenting to you is the ancient gnosis of the Egyptians, then I'm right. Then I'm talking from a position of authority, and I can actually teach you this. I think that nowadays, in 2025, we have accepted long ago that this is not real, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we know that whatever we know of the ancient religions of the Egyptian has nothing to do with whatever Crowley is presenting as Thelema. Even the names of the gods and goddesses of Thelema, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 on what's called the stair of revealing. Like, there was never a 𝗏𝗏𝗏, there was a 𝗏𝗏. There was never a 𝗲𝗏𝗏, there was a 𝗏𝗏𝗏. There was never a 𝗪𝗚𝗏𝗏, there was a 𝗪𝗚𝗟𝗏. And this might seem just like little, nuances, but they actually, like, they were different entities, like when you actually study about them. Crowley was trying to create a syncretic religion, something that would blend in his mind seamlessly whatever he knew of the Western esoteric tradition, and whenever it was starting to flow from the East. So again, yoga, tantra, and everything that was coming from that side, because in many ways, everything that was coming from the East was inherently practical. And he also had direct access to living masters of a kind of an unbroken tradition, whereby here in the West, our tradition is broken. Like, we do not have any real knowledge of, again, as I said, what the Egyptians would do, but not even what the Greek would do, right? And this is something that Dr. Stephen Skinner says a lot, right? Like, he says in his book, he's one of the luminaries about the grimoire tradition, and he makes the point. We in the West, we have a broken tradition, whereby when we look at the East, we can go back in the past and try and find that authority. So what I think is there, like, if you to go back to your question and wrap this up, humanity has always looked for the numinous. From the moment, men and women in caves, heard the crack of thunder outside of the cave, it was like, well, this must be the word of God. And I think that if we were to look at something that is inherently like a beginning of the magical practice, maybe we should look at shamanism per se. And this betrays the fact that I did study anthropology now in the last century, pretty much. But I don't know how much of this vision actually holds with the academics nowadays. But that's where I think we should look at. So a shamanic practice. And I personally, as a Thelemite, I do think that Thelema has a lot more in common with those shamanic practices than ceremonial magic. Ceremonial magic, to me, it's almost like a stepping stone. Like, you start with something kind of complex but very structured, so that you can strip away all the complexity and go to the source, which is connection with the numinous.
Angela, I have an interesting that's following up from what he said. The fact that Crowley may have misrepresented or attempted to do something like by syncretizing, these practices, does that make it any less powerful or less useful? Did that bring anything down? Because everyone's always searching for that source, and if we can get to the source of things, then we have the power. What's your thoughts there?
No, I don't think that the fact that it makes it less powerful. I think that it's a good thing that some practitioners, not all of them, but the ones that I respect, are sensitive to the new academic discoveries that we have, new scholarly discoveries. I think that at the time of Crowley and also at the time of Helena Blavatsky, there weren't the studies that we have today. There weren't really the historical studies to make certain claims with certainty. So there was a bit of a confusion between what people wanted to represent and what was actually factual. So I think that Crowley, and this connects with what Marco was saying, was following the line of perennialist tendency that you have in Western esotericism from the 19th century onwards, and maybe even before that. I mean, even in the Renaissance, you have the search for the 𝗪𝗪𝗪 theologia, which is the primordial theology, right? That Renaissance philosophers like Marsilio Ficino talked about, and they were trying to. Marsilio Ficino translated the Corpus Hermeticum, and he wanted to use Hermeticism as a way to also combine it with Christianity and with other traditions to create these melting pot that would get to the truth of things. So with perennialism, you have this belief that every religion and every spiritual practice has the hint of truth, but they are all veiled by different cultural and historical and contextual elements. So the belief that you have in Theosophy and with other esotericists as well is that if you remove those cultural layers that are related to the specific moment, the specific time, you will find that all religions and all traditions share the same truth. And when you get to that core truth, to that source, that's where you find it. That's the thing that gives you the power. Now, I think that Crowley was doing something similar by trying to combine different traditions, trying to get to that perennialist, using that perennialist methodology to get to that truth, to that power. The fact that obviously he was misinformed in doing that is something that we have clarified, because we know that obviously, his use of Egypt and also of other traditions, even the use of yoga and other Indian traditions was not super accurate. But again, at the time when Crowley was writing and developing his tradition, we didn't have the translations that we have today from Sanskrit and Pali and of all the texts that we now have. So now we have an understanding that is much more accurate that wasn't really available to him. So it's also understandable in a way. So to answer your question, I don't think that these inaccuracies make the system less powerful, because the system itself, I think, is tailored towards the practice, towards something that is effective. So it is meant to produce effects. And even Crowley said, let success be thy proof. So it is meant to cause effects. So if by following that system you don't get the results, then there is something that is not quite right. So it is a system that is oriented towards getting you results. So you're supposed to get those results. So obviously, if by powerful we mean something that causes magical effects or changes, then I don't think that it makes it less powerful. However, I do think and hope that practitioners would start to be a bit more intellectually honest about their practices, just as Marco is doing. I still, when I go to different conferences, occult conferences and historic conferences, because I'm often invited as a speaker, I still hear a lot of talks that are really making claims that don't hold up to any historical facts. And I think in 2025 that is very concerning. That it's different when it happens in the 19th century, in the 20th century, but now that we do have the studies and people just ignore them, because pretty much ignoring history and making up a different history gives a sense of increased validation. I think it actually ends up doing the opposite. To make sound your practice less valid if you insist on something that is not factual and saying, oh, look, there is this thing in Egypt and this other thing in Kabbalah. They vaguely resemble each other. So Kabbalah and Egypt are the same. So I it's like true story. I've heard things like that. Like just by sheer resemblance, they would claim that, one thing comes from another.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. Is I was just trying to understand what it is that they were claiming. So they're claiming, obviously, for instance, I don't know, like there's a cross over here, or the tree of life is here.
I think the most common claim is that all the New Age movements, but also new religious movements and movements from the 20th century, they all want to claim that they are the oldest religion. They all want to claim that they are the primordial source. And I always find it fascinating, as an academic, I find it fascinating. Why would the oldest be necessarily the best? Because if you think about technology, if you have a very old computer, you would say, well, that's not up to date to today's world, right? So it wouldn't be as effective. So why, when it comes to religion and magic, people just assume that if something is very old, then it's more effective? You could actually make the opposite argument, that if something is written in in the Greek magical papyri, perhaps it's not up to date to today's world, to today's zeitgeist, and to how people think, to the collective unconscious, if you want to use a Jungian methodology to understand it. So you can make exactly the opposite claim. So how come practitioners are so hung up on the oldest thing. That's something that I find fascinating as an academic.
Well, I think Angela, that's because exactly what you just said before, because we're still hanging on the maybe illusion, if true not to say delusion, of the 𝗪𝗟𝗀𝗏 theologia. The fact that, the source of everything that's mystical, it's closer to God, the God, that whatever you want to call it, and so it must be better. But there's no evidence of that. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever of that. I would argue that we see this in mainstream culture nowadays, with, especially in the last 10 years, with the popularization of ancient aliens, right? I love the show in the sense that it's great comfort TV. I grew up, reading Peter Colosimo, which was kind of like an ancient alien guy in Italy in the 70s. Of that book, my father gave it to me when I was a child, and here that's why I'm here today, pretty much. Uh-huh. But it's from a magician standpoint, from a practitioner standpoint, as Angela was saying, we should look at magic itself, as an act of mythopoiesis, of creation of myth. And therein lies the actual power of change. If we can latch upon this mythical time, this mythical truth where maybe, I don't know, Atlantis existed, right? And maybe Lemuria existed, and maybe there was some source, there's power in that, without then coming, to the waking world, to the world of where we are right now, and say, well, no, there must be a source in Egypt, because we know it's not the case. We know Thelema has no ties with Egypt whatsoever, despite what Crowley wrote, and despite what a lot of my colleagues and peers will say, and will hate me for saying it again. There's nothing. Like when we look at whatever magical rituals that we have access to, thanks to academic research in the intervening 100 and counting years, well, they bear almost no resemblance to whatever Crowley came up with. To the point that there's some contemporary expression of Crowley groups that then try to create their own new rituals, trying to resemble more those Egyptian rituals that surfaced over the last 100 years, but Crowley did have no access with. So you kind of get into this loop where you strive for authenticity, and you lose the point that the goal is results, and the goal is, in my opinion, connection with the numinous. Because once you establish that connection with the numinous, then you can get ideas, you can get information that it's not readily available. I'm not sure this will ever be accepted from an academic standpoint, but
I think that from an academic standpoint, I mean, in religious studies, we have a lot of respect for what practitioners see and their practices. I mean, the subfield that I'm in is anthropology of religion. So there's nothing like anthropology of religion to show how much academics care about actual practices and how people construct meaning and how people construct the effectiveness of their practice, because we literally study people, human beings, what they do and what they find meaningful and effective. So I agree with you. I think that you can use those those narratives about Egypt and about even connection with Kabbalah that sometimes are not exactly there and so on. I think that if you use them as a form of mythopoiesis, which is creation of myth, and you work within that as a mythos, as a myth that is actually helping guide your practice and making more effective, that's fine. I think the only problem really is when people start to make factual claims based on their own practices. Something that I've also mentioned in a video on my YouTube channel, because I have a video on honest and dishonest syncretism, really because I feel strongly about this, is that imagine, for instance, somebody has a spiritual experience. They have a vision, and in this vision, they have Hecate and, Athena that appear to them, and they say, we are one and the same. We are your goddess. And that is incredibly transformative to the person. So they come out of that experience, and of course to them it's going to be true and meaningful, as it should be, that Hecate and Athena are one and the same, and they might go on and worship them as one goddess. That is totally fine. That's following their path and their spiritual guidance. Now, the problem starts when this person starts to write books or give talks saying, oh, you know that Hecate and Athena are actually the same deity because they both had similar hair and they both had a crescent moon in this one specific depiction. So they are obviously the same, just like me and another dark-haired woman are obviously the same because we just have dark hair and we are both women. So you can see how it is really the leap from acknowledging that your spiritual experience is valid and important and you should follow it, and claiming it as universally factual and historical when it is not. That is the jump that is problematic. And also, it's like, why would you do that? It's like, if something is meaningful to you, do it, but it doesn't have to be approved and acknowledged and universalized by everybody. It's I think it just tells that people have a need for dogmatism besides, validation, because, to be validated, you just have the experience and it works and it's meaningful to you. That is your validation. But if you want everybody to acknowledge it as a historical fact when it is not, then that's a search for dogmatism. You want to create a new dogma.
Can I play devil's advocate, just because I'm very curious what you guys will say about this? Obviously, we as humans are well aware that experience is a great teacher, and just like you said, it's meaningful to me. What I experience throughout my day helps me to shape my world. But what about, and obviously what I experience here, as you're clearly saying, just because I experienced whatever it is here that's giving me happiness and joy doesn't mean that neither of you are going to experience the same thing just because I experienced it. However, when I look at now, and I'm just throwing this out here, all the prophets and all the great spiritual teachers, many of them have these crazy, profound spiritual experiences. And then we basically have our religions and potentially, like you're saying, dogma of them saying this is the way, or this is a very big thing. And that the masses, should heed my experience and what I said. I was at the top of the mountain. God gave me the commandments. Muhammad, I went through this trip and I was out of body and all this. And here's truth. And Buddha's under a tree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my question then becomes one of, do you then think it's not possible for a human to have a spiritual experience and pull back some truth from the other side to then portray it for the masses? Like, is there, certainly there must be some form. You are not the same as the other black-haired woman, but you are also not different, and does that mean that there is something that I could go have my spiritual experience and bring it back to you, like Plato's allegory of the cave,
I don't think the two things are in opposition. I think, what you're saying is not all in opposition to what I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, because it's one thing to say, I derive a spiritual experience and I want to teach other people about it. And another thing is to make historical claims, which have to do with facts and not with spiritual experiences. So you are talking about the realm of spiritual experiences. So deriving a spiritual truth that you can pass down to people that are seeker on a path that is similar to yours. So we are still in the realm of spiritual experiences. Whereas what I was talking about is translating the spiritual experience into the realm of science and history, and claiming that what you have experienced spiritually necessarily has historical grounding, which often it doesn't, and it shouldn't necessarily.
And you know what? We are actually touching on a very important Thelemic conundrum, and that is that when you read Magic in Dream Practice, one of the messages of Crowley that Crowley tries to push there is scientific illuminism, which is kind of what we're discussing here, like trying to work with myth, work with magic, but try to find the roots for these experiences into repeatable experiments. Okay, so try to have a scientific approach to that. This is the same Crowley that was pushing himself as the prophet of Thelema, because in the Book of the Law, 𝗪𝗟𝗟𝗏, which is our Tantra, our central text, in the first chapter, 𝗏𝗏 does say, like, heed the words of my prophet, pretty much. Like, I'm not quoting verbatim, but that's the idea. And Crowley struggled with this his entire life. And we struggle as Thelemites with it nowadays, because in Thelema, by the way, I should preface this by saying Thelema is minuscule. It's a very tiny. I don't know. Let's call it a religion. It's simple like that. It's a very tiny religion. We're talking like thousands of people, and that's about it, right? And even in this minuscule sect, let's call it sect, like we have a lot of differences. We have those who believe that we should heed the words of Crowley as prophet, that only Crowley can explain the holy books, because the book of the law is our central text, but we have around, like, some say 12, some say 15 more called Class A material or holy books of Thelema. So only Crowley can comment on that, and he did sometimes, and sometimes he didn't. And in the case of the Book of the Law, he tried to comment it like multiple times across his lifetime. He got to a point where he described his entire commentary as the most turgid hogwash I ever penned. So you can imagine how little he cared about it.
Yeah.
And then he eventually he released what is known as the Tunis comment, or New Comment, which is the comment that you find printed in the back of every edition of the Book of the Law nowadays, which kind of says something like, you shouldn't read this book, you should burn this book, you should not discuss this book. Only Crowley only my prophet, that is this Crowley, can say anything about that. Most people don't know that he wrote this Tunis comment after his experience in let's say in the famous Abbey of Thelema in Cefalù, and that was because one of his direct students, Norman Mudd, pretty much start to get convinced that he was the prophet, and he had to explain the Book of the Law and the holy books by his word. And so Crowley is like, nope, you're not gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna stamp you on. So and then again, like, when you read the way that New Comment is written, it starts with "Do what the will shall be the whole of the law," and ends with "Love is the law and the will," and everything else seems like almost like a challenge. Like, well, if everything you must do is to find your own will, why then there's like 5 clauses of things you shouldn't do? Is it Crowley being the trickster, his trickster self, like he's trying to challenge people? I believe so. Other people are very sectarian, very dogmatic, because as Angela was saying, I do believe that humans have a need for doctrine, have a need for dogmatism, and have also a need for validation. Like, there will always be the next person that comes up and say, like, I lost count of how many reincarnations of Crowleys I've met over my life, and how many. I mean, in Thelemic circles, there's this document. I can send it if you want to laugh about it. We call it Liber Nuts.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's something like 40 years of Crowley reincarnations and prophets of the Eon. It goes with the landscape, right? So again, I do think that you can have a very profound magical mystical experience where you get a glimpse of truth, and I think you're also able to come back and communicate that truth. What I think it's important, and then you should almost like remove yourself from the equation, right? Like, you come here, you communicate the truth, and then it doesn't matter if people heed your words or people pick up on what you say or not. I wrote a Substack called this is why I really don't want to hear about your mystical experiences, because I believe you have them. I'm 100% with you, but there's no way you can really convince me of them, because knowledge is unfettered, is direct. I'm not you, and you're not me. We see the world in different ways. We can have glimpses of the truth, and that's about it.
I'm gonna now that we're somewhat deep into this podcast, I'm gonna push us here, because I don't think I'll have a better chance to discuss this with someone. So this is a very hard turn left. And so I'm hoping, and I don't think I've seen you guys talk about this. Let me just not preface this at all, okay? Chapter 12 of Magik in Theory and Practice. Are either of you familiar with what chapter?
I know where you're going. Yeah, I know where you're going. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just reading the other day. I was telling Jalen here that I was reading in preparation for the podcast, and came upon an interesting chapter, which is chapter 12, which is of the bloody sacrifice and matters cognate. And so I'm just going to read. It's very short. I think it's only 2 sentences here, and I mean, clearly this could be taken out of context, but I think you guys are going to add the context for us here. In any case, it was the theory of the ancient magicians that any living being is a storehouse of energy, varying in quantity according to the size and health of the animal, and in quality according to its mental and moral character. At the death of the animal, this energy is liberated suddenly. And so the animal should therefore be killed within the circle or the triangle, as the case may be, so the energy cannot escape. Now, that is a very interesting thing to read and understand. I mean, we obviously throughout human history have an understanding of from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice. You can find this in every culture virtually and every religion. How to come across this, because we haven't even delved into the part of the other side of Crowley, which we'll get into here. We'll get into that because I would love to know what's true and not true. But just from that standpoint right there, I just want to ask the straight up question, like, is he saying this? Because once again, at the end of that chapter, he goes, oh, well, this might fly over the heads of some of you guys here who are not. So is he directly talking about blood sacrifice, animal sacrifice, potentially human sacrifice? Because there's a lot of things in that chapter that are also now within the zeitgeist. Before we go down, could be conspiracy or the rabbit hole of things. So what do you guys perceive from that? And then we'll go from there. I think I'm on Angela, I believe.
Marco, I'm gonna let you go first.
All right. Well then, so we know for a fact from Crowley's diaries that he did, as a young boy, engage in animal sacrifice. He killed a cat, famously, because he wanted to see if the cats really had 9 lives. And later on, he crucified a toad as part of a ritual that he devised in order to basically denounce the slave religions, that is, the religions of the old Eon. So all the religions that want to see humanity as meek and bowing towards a god above. Okay, we know of this so he can deny that. We also know that Crowley was reading at the time James Frazer and the Golden Bough, which at the time was considered to be one of the main revolutionary texts on anthropology. And nowadays we know, once again, that they're fanciful stories that don't really hold water from what we know from the evidence. And in the Golden Bough, it all starts with the story of the Nemeton and the killing of the king, the young king, that goes and kills the old king in order to get his power, right, and get the kingly sovereignty out of the old man dying. So he was inspired by all these things. But then again, we also have to realize that Crowley, exactly if you read the note in the very same chapter, he really loved shocking his readers. In many ways, he felt it was his duty to shock the readers, because he wanted people to get a reaction out of people. So in many ways, he could see who could understand maybe deeper magical philosophical ideas, and those who would just be, shocked and disgusted, and, they would just, remove themselves from the equation without going any further. Unfortunately, this really didn't do us Thelemites in the 21st century any good, because, as you were mentioning in passing, we are still contending all sorts of conspiracy theories that sees Thelema as a cult based on blood sacrifice. That is really not true. There is, however, I'm going to be completely open with you, because actually it's a big part of the book that's coming up in November, so I wrote about it. There is, in Thelema, a focus on the extraction and sanctification of blood, your own blood, however. This goes back to the idea of using blood as as the base for a talisman, okay, what we call it the Eucharist, which is a concept akin to the Eucharist of the Catholic Church. And so basically a physical talisman, which is based of blood and other fluids maybe, that then gets sanctified and consecrated, and then is ingested again to add to the let's say almost like to add to the energy battery that you're trying to build, as a way to receive the knowledge and conversation with Holy Guardian Angel. Big discussion about the knowledge and conversation with Holy Guardian Angel we can have later on. There is a ritual called Liber 44, the Mass of the Phoenix, that asks for the practitioner to cut a little bit, like a little wound on the breast, let some drops of blood spill, that it goes onto this wafer, this Eucharist, and then the Eucharist, one is burned and one is eaten. This symbology harkens back to the alchemical symbology of the pelican. The pelican is that that bird that in alchemical symbology slashes his
chest, or
part of his chest. Thank you. His chest open so that he can feed its own youngs. It is, in fact, a Christic figure. Christ dying on the cross and basically giving his blood in sacrifice for humanity to be renewed. In Thelema, there's no salvation, there's no vicarious atonement, so you do that to yourself. However, is there anywhere in Thelema a ritual sacrifice of beasts or humans? Absolutely not. Every time you see Crowley, laboring onto this topic, he's really like pulling your leg, and he's really trying to shock you, and he's really trying to convince you that, is this really for me? Is this right? Should I do some things like that? And I will say one more thing. When you go through the rituals of initiation of Ordo Templarientis, which I went through all of them, even if I'm not a member anymore, I went through them. There are moments where they're meant to shock you. And there are moments but I can tell you, there's nothing there at all, right? Like it's all about, like, let's say if this person sticks with the plan, right? Let's say if this person is courageous enough to go through the whole thing. And I don't think, we live in times where everything is very sanitized. And I think there's a good side to that, and there's a bad side to that. The good side is obviously that, ideally everything is safer. But then again, if you look at the state of the world, maybe that's not the case. But I think that we have lost a lot of the way these rituals and these ideas were originally planned back by Crowley. Because if you sanitize too much, and if you're scared about talking about things as we're doing here very openly, because somebody can take your words out of context and try to cancel you on Twitter, then you lose part of the experience. But for those who are listening to this, I don't know if this is gonna disappoint you, but there's no actual animal sacrifice or human sacrifice in Thelema, and in Crowley.
I think that Marco really covered it all. Crowley's views on sacrifice are really not straightforward. They're not a straightforward endorsement of literal violence. They're really part of a broader symbolic system in which sacrifice, which sometimes is meant as semen, sometimes as ego, sometimes as breaking taboos, is really a metaphor for magical transformation. And while he employed transgressive imagery to shock and provoke, his more mature magical writings generally repurpose sacrificial language in psychosexual and symbolic terms, rather than advocating for a real human and animal sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Because for instance, there is a famous quotation which is part of Magik 𝗪𝗟𝗏 book 4, that says, "A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable victim." And at first glance, this passage appears to endorse, literal child sacrifice, and it has often been cited as evidence of Crowley's depravity. But Crowley's footnote to this passage also offers a critical interpretative clue about this passage, because he also says that it is curious that this phrase is generally interpreted as meaning a human sacrifice. In fact, these words are taken in their occult sense. So it's his own footnote that clarifies this. So also later, Crowley reveals that the male child is a symbol for the ejaculation of semen during sexual magic, and that the sacrifice refers to the magical use of orgasm as a means of spiritual transformation and manifestation of will. 𝗪𝗂𝗡, for instance, in his studies on Crowley, notes that such statements must be situated within the Thelemic framework in which sacrificial language is often deliberately ironic and esoterically veiled, and it is aimed at shocking bourgeois sensibilities while also encoding deeper initiatory meanings. So, it really shows Crowley's approach to broader trend in modern occultism, because there's the psychologization and the symbolic interpretation of traditional magical practices. So it would be things that would be part of traditions from the past that have been reinterpreted in a psychologized way and a symbolic way.
I want to touch on something. Both of you, you've both actually hinted at this, but through a small story here. We had on Dean Radin, Dr. Dean Radin. I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with him.
Yeah.
We've had him on a couple times, and the second time that we had him on, he was describing. I believe he's writing a new book as well right now, or maybe it's coming later this year. That he did a study where they were trying to understand the effects that, I believe, a control group, and I'm probably botching this, but you guys will get the sense, though, at least a control group, just people who are not doing anything, meditators, and then I believe people who were engaged in some form of magical practice, ceremonial magic of some kind or something like this. And then it was to measure their effect on the world or some sort of contraption that they were using. And the winner of that, let's say, is that the control group showed nothing or next to nothing. The meditators showed something quite significant, that they had an ability to do so, but those with ceremonial magic showed the greatest effect on whatever it was that they were using. I can't remember now. And I asked why. Why was that? And at least his idea behind this, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, was that through the practice of ceremonial magic, of course, he said most of those people are meditators, or they have been engaged in some form of concentration or will training of some form. And so, at least in his idea, he was thinking, well, they are also this. They've maybe taken it to a next level or to a next step or something along those lines, right? I mean, he's studying this. He doesn't quite know. And so I think this is a good part to then push to now get an understanding of, because when people see magic and hear magic, like there's talks of wands and things here and this that can all be misconstrued. People, I'm sure, and maybe even younger people who are just finding out about this are expecting to get into the practice, do a couple animal sacrifices, have a Harry Potter wand on the street, and just be moving buildings and whatever, right? And so to get more concrete with it, what is this effect that Dean Radin is saying? I mean, we talked about that we're going to have an ability to affect our reality through our will. What exactly is happening? What are we doing? How would I be able to understand what I'm doing is doing the things that what are these results you guys talked about that we're trying to get? How do I begin to understand this?
I'm not sure what you're asking, to be honest. Are you asking how do people measure the effectiveness of magic, or?
Absolutely. I think because if I'm going into this practice, like I said, and I expect to go sacrifice a cat, and then I expect to go have $1 million, right? I mean, you said it's magic. I should be having an effect on my will. Is this magic, or is it something different or deeper? How do you measure the effect that you're having your magical practice on your life?
I think, well, it comes down also to how magic works. And I don't know, I'm not familiar with this specific study that Dean Radin has done, so I cannot really comment on that specifically. But in terms of how magic works, I think there are a few things that I see that across different traditions are, you can see that there's a pattern that magic works via using forms of sympathetic magic where the like attracts the like, and that it follows the path of least resistance, and that there's also something called the principle of proportional energy. It's like it's not like magic can allow you to achieve anything and everything. It's really a matter of it increases the likelihood of something to happen that is less likely to happen otherwise. So if something is not as likely to happen, you have to increase the likelihood via other means, or creating a stepwise ritual plan where you don't ask directly for the $1 million. Perhaps you ask to get a degree first and then a job after, and you create steps towards that goal. Because if you are broke and homeless and you ask for $1 million in a ritual, I can tell you that you're not gonna get it. It's incredibly unlikely that that's gonna be effective. So the way that you measure the effectiveness of your magic is obviously by achieving what is that you ask for, but also to learn what is achievable and what is not achievable, so that your magic can be strategic, so that you're not really, I mean, this is not dissimilar from any other thing in life. Like if you're doing a sport, for instance, there are things that you can achieve based on your level of training and things that you cannot achieve. So you just have to progressively go through the different stages so that you get to the best potential that you can possibly get. But it's not like when you start in any sport, you say, oh, I want to become a champion, and then you can become a champion after a week. It needs to go through progressive steps. But I'd say the way to assess whether magic works is when you get what you ask for during your rituals. But before that can be assessed, you also have to understand what is achievable via magic and how to use magic strategically so that you achieve the goal within the time frame that is likely for you to achieve that goal, and also something that is possible for you to achieve as well.
So let me try and add a little bit. First of all, everything that Angela said, I agree with her 100%. Also, we should understand that when we talk about magic, right, from my perspective, that's not a clear-cut definition, in the sense that, again, is it low magic or sorcery, or is it high magic or theurgy? Most people nowadays think of magic as what I would call low magic or sorcery, and it's not, low and high are not qualitative statements. They just represent something like horizontal expansion and vertical expansion, something that gives you results, like things you want, and something that actually allow you to elevate yourself and become more spiritually advanced and possibly more spiritually evolved. Okay, Crowley and Thelema, the magic with the K of Crowley, was almost solely centered on this vertical high magic side of things. Almost nowhere in whatever Crowley teaches there's like spells for success. He used to do sexo-magical operations and rituals to attract money and success, but when you look at the doctrine of Thelema, it's almost solely theurgical, high magic practice, okay? Because what you're really trying to do is to find your true will. In the Book of the Law, it's called pure will, but they're the same thing. And true will, it's not what you want, but many ways it's what you're meant to be. It's a way of finding the trajectory of your incarnation, and once you set onto that trajectory, you live in a state of eudaimonia. Things happen. Things happen. I mean, this doesn't mean that you win the lottery tomorrow, but this means that things start to go in the direction where you're supposed to go. This doesn't mean that suffering and sorrow are exorcised from your life, not at all. But there's a way for you to have an unshakable an unshakable gnosis that you are exactly where you're meant to be. Now, nowadays, most people are not interested with that. That's why Thelema is not as popular at all, right? Most people are interested in getting things done. I guess it's in this economy, right? In the world we live in, we try to find ways to get things. And there's nothing bad about this, because again, when we look at the history of magic, when we look at the spells of the Greek magical papyri, thank you, Greek magical papyri, they're all about let me get the love of this woman, let me get more money, let's kill my enemies. They're all very practical. They're all like people needed things done, right? And this transformed over the course of the centuries in maybe the spells of the witches, the term, and maybe nowadays into what we call manifestation, possibly, like new thought first, and then the secret, and then affirmations and whatnot. That has almost nothing to do with what Thelema is concerned about. And I really believe that a lot of people nowadays clearly are drawn towards that because we live in difficult times, and we live in times where we need like all hands on deck. But the problem is that if you throw yourself into new thought, into manifestation, into affirmations, without having done any sort of work on yourself, like Angela was saying, without having actually realized that you cannot go from zero to hero, you have to go to the gym, you have to train, you have to understand what's possible. I mean, you used to be a footballer, right? You know exactly what it's like to train hard and to get onto the pitch and get better and better and better. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, nowadays people think they can just read a book. And maybe they do that because, influencers, podcasts, not this one, but in general, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that they think that they can actually be Harry Potter. There's no, magic doesn't work by genetics, right? Like I've argued before that maybe some of us are more naturally talented at that. Like maybe, surely you're a much better football player than I was when I was like in Italy trying to kick the ball, and I was terrible at that, right? Because of course, you were born with an innate talent. But that innate talent is only maybe 5%. Then in order to truly manifest, what you need to do is that you need to understand what are all the steps. And that's where high magic, or theurgy as I call it, it's my terminology, it's not the accepted terminology, but in my book I call it theurgy. That helps you grow vertically. And as you grow vertically, your perspective of what's possible widens, and so your vantage point gets better, and so okay, maybe I don't need to try and win the lottery, because look, I can get that now, and I can go there now, and I can work with magical practice. They can be different. They can be rituals. They can be sigils. The arsenal is almost limitless. But then you can learn those tools, and then focus on what's achievable. And as your perspective keeps on growing, your vantage point expands, and then maybe the lottery is possible. But that's because you worked 20 years to get to that point. So sadly, if anybody's listening to me, my rants right now, first of all, don't kill cats. That's really bad. You do not sacrifice animals or humans, for what matters. Don't buy a wand right away. Like, there's a reason why you must understand what the wand is. I say you must understand what if you're watching the video, like all this paraphernalia that's behind me means and why it's there, etc., etc. Maybe in time you'll get there. Learn how to sit and breathe. That's the step one of magic. Boring. Sit in silence with yourself and learn how to be aware of your breathing, because that is going to be the fuel for all sorts of manifestation down the line.
�eyofwilljohn.com. Exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential. Would you guys also characterize this? And I have a more literal and simple question right after, but breath, just as a practice, is so key and foundational for so many different cultures, obviously, getting an understanding of this. And a lot of questions pop into my head here. But as a next step, one that I've seen, and I have quite a few books on these sorts of topics. Robert Bruce, I believe, wrote Actor Dynamics and Energy Work as well. And energy work, though, as another practice, I've seen descriptions in preparation for all this as well Help me out with the practice that is the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram.
Ritual of the pentagram,
right?
yeah.
I saw someone's description of that, and we can get into that because that's something that I see being purported as start here, right? Do this practice, the Kabbalistic cross and the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Do this every day. That's that. From what I've seen, this is how people are saying start here. Would you guys agree? And I believe, I want to say it's Damien Eccles. Is that his name? Potentially.
Yeah, Damien,
who didn't disagree with that, but just mentioned guys, the breath is the first one. Energy work seems to be stage 2. And so I was hoping maybe you guys could give me, do you guys agree with that? Is that breath first, energy work, and then I'm not sure what would come next, but maybe you could explain what energy work is and if that is what's being activated by doing those practices. Based on my understanding, that's what he was getting at, but I could be wrong.
I mean, I can maybe say big part of the way I teach magic is exactly this. And I agree with Damien Eccles 100%. And I think that this is something that is lost in translation in a lot of the magical primers, in a lot of the magical discussion, because a lot of people, just as you were saying, would say start with the ritual. Well, what does fuel the ritual, right? Is it just the gestures? Is it just the Hebrew words that are part of this ritual, which almost invariably end up being mispronounced and badly, enunciated, etc., or is there something beneath this, a kernel of energy that actually can be harnessed? And I believe it is, and it is what you would call energy work, breath work. In my book and in the way I teach these things, I start with pranayama. Pranayama is one of the 8 limbs of yoga according to Patanjali, and really means control yama of breath, prana. And that prana, I understand it to be also energy, right? So it's not just the breathing, the oxygen you breathe in, but by virtue of trying to harness, control this intake of breath and oxygen, you transmute it magically. Again, we're not talking science here. We're moving on to that metapoietic environment we discussed before. But that transformation is what fuels everything else. You have to start with breathing. And again, this is what Crowley said as well. The beginning of 𝗪𝗟𝗏𝗏 is not book 3, Magic and Theory and Practice, but it's book 1, Mysticism. And it starts with sit down, sit still, close your eyes, and breathe. And again, if you were to read that book nowadays, which came out in 1929, so almost 100 years old now, it tells you to sit in the dragon position or the thunderbolt position. Don't do that. If you're new to asana, if you're new to yoga, you're going to hurt yourself. Just sit comfortably in a chair with the spine erect, close your eyes and breathe. That is what is going to fuel everything else that you will do as you go through, as you learn more and more tools into the ritual, the ceremonial magic ritual tool set, if you want. But without breathing, in my opinion, and I know that this opinion is debated in the community, but in my opinion, without breathing, there's nothing else, right? You just go through the motions. You just say words. And I would argue that maybe, if you're really, really deep into this or that symbol set, for instance, if you do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, and you are, as it was originally conceived, you're very much involved into an Abrahamic symbol set. So you do think that the power that is behind this ritual is the power of the one God through the agency of his angels, etc., etc. Then that might still work for you. But I can tell you, because I've seen this, I tested out with various people. If you add the breathing, it's going to be better. It's going to be much more powerful. And again, this is exactly what Crowley says, but it's also what is now, in recent year, it came out, because again, thanks to academic studies, we know a lot more of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and more Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, for those listening to us, was this group of magicians that came to be in London in 1888 and became kind of like the blueprint for the idea of the magical school, right? There was anything before that, kind of theosophy, but kind of not. And there's never been anything close to that, because everything else have tried to recreate the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn kind of failed, including Crowley's attempts. But even then, in recently surfaced documents, they speak about the power of breathing. They speak about the fact that it's not just the enunciation or the vibration of the god names or the names of the archangels. It's the fact that you do that by vibrating those names. That is, by infusing those names with prana, with breathing, right? So that's where you start. I have no doubts about it.
Yeah, I agree with Marco, and I would also add the other two essential elements for a daily practice, which I think are more important than any other ritual that you may decide to do, are one, meditation in the sense of control over your thoughts, emotions, and sensations, and two, connection. So fostering a sense of connection. So I think that these three things, breathing, meditation, which I suppose breathing can also be part of meditation, and also fostering a sense of connection, meaning that you during your meditative state you focus on the breathing, then you focus on having a sort of detachment from your thoughts, emotions, and sensations. This is a typical Buddhist meditation called vipassana, where basically you sit still with your spine erect, as Marco suggested, and then as you close your eyes you will have thoughts emerging in your consciousness, and then instead of entertaining and engaging with those thoughts, you just observe them as if they were clouds in the sky. And when you observe them, you create a distance between the subject, which is you, and the object, which is your thought. So it means that there is a detachment, a sense of detachment. You don't feel like your thoughts are you. And the same happens with the emotions. So if you are in this meditative state and you have anger, anxiety, whatever it is that comes up, and you observe it, instead of engaging with it, you observe it as creating a distance between you, the subject, who observes the anger or the anxiety. I mean, if you can see that the anxiety is there, it means that you are not it, that you are observing it. So you are the observer. So when you create this distance, then you detach from them, and that gives you control over it. And the same for sensations, physical sensations. And that's how even in yoga they would cultivate a control of their body and how it responds to external stimuli, even the extreme ones. And then fostering a sense of connection. I mean, once you are in this state where you can observe your thoughts, emotions, and sensations, and what is left is the observer, then you can cultivate a sense of pure connection where you don't feel just you feel completely immersed in the fabric of reality, and you are like everything that is. I think that cultivating this alongside the breathing, which is also very, very important, are the most important and foundational practices that should be done daily. And then, if people want to do the 𝗪𝗟𝗶 or any other specific ritual, I think there is value in that, but I think that they are made effective only insofar as these other elements are in place. Because if you don't have control over your thoughts, emotions, and sensations, how can any ritual be effective if you are not able to have laser focus and condense all of your mental energy into one single point, which in Sanskrit was called ekagrata in Sanskrit literature, which means the one pointed, the single pointed focus. And it's a bit like scattered light is not going to affect much, but if it is condensed within a magnifying glass, then it can burn. It can set a piece of paper to fire. So that's the difference between having a single pointed focus and being able to do that. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is not just when you have to do the ritual. It's something that you have to cultivate and train regularly. So that is what is going to make the most difference, I think.
Uh-huh. And it's fascinating because you guys sound exactly like me within the football space. I think what's going on here is that when you see these rituals and you see this stuff, it's obviously very exciting and it looks amazing. It's no different than wanting to know the newest Cristiano Ronaldo step over move. It's just like, if I learn this move, I'll be, Ronaldo. If I learn the, 𝗪𝗟𝗶, boom, I'm a magician. I've got it, right? And there's a lot of stuff that Cristiano Ronaldo did before, and there's a lot of stuff that a proper magician learned, discipline, in meditation, etc. It's an arduous process, and I find that probably it's more a characteristic potentially of the society that we now live in. Like you said, you YouTube and this space allows us to go much more in depth. And I feel anybody who's listening to this is going to get a greater understanding and have a much better time now moving from us here after a couple hours to whatever it is that they decide, rather than seeing a quick TikTok where somebody was like, do the LBRP and then you'll be this and da 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 da, boom. And that's where we live. That's how we live. And we accept that as like our thing. But I have a question. I'll go to you, Angela, first, especially. I'm very curious as a scholar in this sense, what to then make of the Siddhis. What am I to make of the stories of the people who are literally claiming to be able to do things that the normal people cannot? Is this just a practice of them literally putting in the work that the average person isn't over the course of a time and growing that? Or is that nothing?
So the Siddhis is something that is present in yoga, in the yoga tradition. So the development of superhuman powers is something that is present in a few traditions, and notably in Tantra and yoga. The Siddhi is a terminology from yoga. There's a big difference between Tantra and yoga in their approach to developing supernatural abilities, because in Tantra, it is something that they would work towards specifically, whereas in yoga, the development of the Siddhi is something that is supposed to happen as a natural result of your spiritual progress. So it's not something that you do specific practices to develop the Siddhis. So if you are a yogin or a yogini, you are going to follow your path, which is actually very rigid, because in yoga there's a lot of mind control. In fact, yoga was systematized by Patanjali in the 8th century, and the first sentence of the Yoga Sutra is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is yoga is the ceasing of the mental swirlings. So yoga is very much about control, and it's different from Tantra. But yeah, yoga is about control. So you have to control your mind, you have to control your sensations, you have to control your emotions, and if you follow the path of the yogin, then over time, as you progress, you will naturally develop the Siddhis. So the Siddhis will be, in a way, a testament to the fact that you have progressed on your spiritual path, but it's not something that you have to seek. It's not something that is your aim. It is just a consequence, a natural consequence that you are not really going after. Whereas in Tantra, it's different, because in Tantra, they would have specific practices to develop superhuman abilities. And Tantra is not so much about control. It's more about, it massively depends on the tradition, because Tantra is very transversal and there are so many different traditions. But to generalize and perhaps even oversimplify a little bit to make it understandable, Tantra is more about letting go. It's like, if yoga, I see it as control, and Tantra is like letting something release so much and so greatly to the point where it extinguishes itself. So in Tantra, you have the tantric approach would be like, if I feel anger, instead of observing anger and creating a distance between the observed and the observer, I immerse myself in anger. I engage so much into it until it fully extinguishes itself, because it is the nature of things to extinguish themselves at a certain point. So it is more a path of full immersion and being fully swept away by the thing until you see its own extinction. You are so wrapped into it that it extinguishes itself. But yeah, in Tantra you do have the search for those kind of powers. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question though.
You definitely did. And it leads me on to the question just to ask Marco, which is, I think people are going to, in some ways, equate the supernatural and superhuman abilities, like we've said, with potentially a magic practice, whether that's through Crowley or any other tradition. Do you, I don't know how to phrase this. Have you seen anyone with an ability to do this? Do you believe that is a possibility, even though it may not be the main goal of the practice, obviously achieving your true will? What do you find there?
I have seen strange things in my life, yes.
Mhm.
I've seen things that seemed impossible, and I have seen things that to this day I cannot explain by any scientific mean. If you ask me what I've seen, well, I've seen bilocation. I've seen people being in the same place, like that I could see like here and there. And this was as a result of very long, drawn-out rituals. I've seen manifestation of unseen entities, right? Especially through the work with Solomonic magic and 𝗪𝗟𝗟𝗏, which is a system to conjure spirits. So I do believe strongly that there is more out there that we normally think possible, right? I also think that it's exceedingly rare for people to be able to, to manifest those powers, those supernatural abilities. I like to call them supranatural or supra-rational because they're natural. They exist because they're part of the experience of this life, this cosmos that we live in, right? It's just that they're not immediately accessible to everybody. But if you ask me, can you get there? Yes, but how many Ronaldos are there again? I know to go back to your analogy earlier on. I was also wanted to go shortly back to what Angela was saying. She described beautifully the difference between yoga and tantra, right? Control and release. In many ways, this tension between these two polarities, the absolute control and the absolute let go, the absolute release, is absolutely crucial in Thelema to develop some, let's say, supernatural abilities. There's multiple texts that touch upon this. The one I like to quote all the time is 𝗪𝗟𝗟𝗏 hermeticus, which means 𝗪𝗟𝗟, or of the hermetic fishhook. And it's the idea that, hermetic fishhook, so basically the idea of initiation, Christ being the fisher of man, right? Christ being the one that fishes, like calls people to Christianity so they can be saved. Well, in Thelema, we have this idea in this book. It says that the perfect adept, the perfect initiate, is one who has its head over the highest heavens and his feet into the deepest hells. And this is, again, this idea between control and release, to absolute, attention to everything, so that you can detach from identifying with everything and letting, like, actually the polar opposite, letting go of everything. Like this polarity, or syzygy, as we call it in Thelemic Gnosticism, it's fundamental, because only once you go on through both sides, only once you experience absolute control and absolute release, then you can find the smooth point in the middle, and from that balance point, that's when the siddhis arise. Like, we don't call them siddhis. I mean, Crowley did use the term from time to time, but let's call it siddhis because you went there, and I like that. Also, that is what allows, like, in the moment when maybe those abilities starts to emerge, there's two choices really in Thelema. One is to let them go, and let them go, and then basically for you to seek further annihilation, further dissolution back into the womb of what we call Babylon or 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, like the source of all that there is, or there is the opportunity to hold on to those powers. But by doing that, you lose yourself. You become what Crowley used to call a black brother, right? Which is terribly racist in nowadays. I realize that. Yeah. But he really meant somebody who's lost the light. Somebody who, by holding on to those powers that they found, they let go of any further evolution. This is actually very crucial in Thelema because, again, learning, achieving the union with the Holy Guardian Angel, and that sort of, maybe Carl Gustav Jung would call individuation, is what led those powers to surface. Because again, you went to one side, you went to the other, you find there's a smooth point in the middle, you find that balance point and the knowledge with the connection with the Holy Guardian Angel. But then if you hold on to that experience, like this is it, this is all that there is, that's when you lose the opportunity to go even further, to go actually back to the source and become one with everything. So in many ways in Thelema, we kind of have like we do have a more leaning towards like a yogic perspective on those things. Like we want to go there, but then we want to let go. Yeah.
Right. This is an interesting deviation from what you just said, but I'm very curious about this. How did Crowley make money? Was he wealthy and like okay? I don't hear. No one ever talks about that. I'm like, how's this guy doing all this stuff? Who's funding this? You know.
So Crowley,
He was loaded.
Crowley,
Gone.
yeah,
He was
Crowley-
loaded.
Crow-
Was he?
by the time he was 18, Crowley inherited what we think nowadays money was £6 million or $10 million
From?
because he was from his family, because he was the heir of the Crowley-Alton brewery. This was one of the many breweries that by the end of the 1700s into the 1800s became very popular, because of course, it was a moment, after the Restoration, where people were starting drinking again, everybody was happy, and then so like the beer business, also with India and everything was happening at the moment with empire, the beer business was booming. But there's something else that a lot of people don't know, and that is that Crowley's grandfather, who is the one who really made the money for the family, had a genius idea, and that was starting to serve food in his own pubs. Here in the UK, we have this huge tradition of the Sunday roast, right? We go to pubs, even, I don't know if Angela, you go, but I love going to Sunday roast.
I don't.
Doing this. She doesn't. She's more Italian than me, but I love the Sunday roast. But anyway, that's kind of Crowley's grandfather's idea.
Wow.
Like everybody always kind of served food in pubs, but maybe yes, maybe no. He made a business out of it, and he made millions. Crowley's father was member of this sect of Plymouth Brethren, and especially he was a preacher of the Exclusive Brethren subsect. And so basically he didn't spend any money, because he was more about preaching the word of God and living a very sober life. Crowley went the opposite way. So if you ask us, how did he burned to, again, the equivalent of $10 million between the age of 18 and the age of 35, 36. He was declared bankrupt because he was living large. What I mean? Large.
I didn't know that.
But you also have to say that on top of living large, I mean, he was staying at the Savoy in London for months to an end. The Savoy, I don't know if you've ever been, it still commands to another day, it's £12,000 a night now. It must have been something similar 100 years ago. So, even if you have $10 million, you burn through it in a decade or two, right?
Okay.
But also, he spent a lot of money publishing the Equinox, publishing his books, and he published a lot of stuff, and he was always publishing very beautiful editions, right? So he spent a lot of money in there. But yeah, he was loaded.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, that does change, obviously, what's ability. He's not worried about in Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He's covered there on the food, shelter.
Exactly. You got it. No, in many ways you got it. Yeah, exactly. He could really devolve himself to seeking the numinous in his own way, because food and shelter. Yeah, he was born with with 10 silver spoons.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That, I mean, obviously everything that he did within his life, obviously that part gets kind of skipped aside. His life as when you take a general picture, is so fanciful and so full of different things. But okay, that answers that for me. I have a question on some of his. I mean, there's breakoffs and things that happened. Obviously, when any religious order, just like you said, things are going to happen like this. But there are some interesting characters, and this is going to bring me back to the ancient. But I want to start kind of right there. There's a guy named Israel Regardie, I think, potentially. He was someone who's related to the Golden Dawn, obviously, as well. And so, but there's an interesting story. What would happen to me? I back when I played in the MLS in the U.S., I would go to training. I would come home, and much like you, at least, I would eat after training, and I would lay down. And laying down was actually some of the first times that I had out of body experiences. I didn't know what they were. I had no idea what was going on. It just happened, and whatever, But nap time was that thing. But what was playing in the background on the TV was actually the History Channel, because I found it interesting, all stuff. And this is around the time ancient aliens became a thing. And at one point, they were telling this story about, I believe it had to have been Israel, and I believe Crowley walking down the street. I'm sure you guys know this story. And there was somebody in front of them. I might be butchering this story, but there was somebody in front of them, supposedly. Crowley went to his knees and held his hands out like this. And the person in front of him also fell to the ground and fell to his knees, and was trying to tell him, Israel, of an understanding of the power that is potentially available to you, and whatnot. And so my question to him, I know that Israel potentially took everything from the Golden Dawn. Essentially, if I'm to understand this correctly, the Golden Dawn was maybe a little bit secretive of their documents and whatnot, and he decided to publish them, and that's one of the main reasons we have a whole host of them. But who would you guys say, and I'll throw it to you, Angela, because I'm sure you've had to have studied many of these different names. Who would you guys say from that time period there? Most people know 𝗤𝗡𝗡 Blavatsky. We'll leave that for another whole podcast in and of itself in Theosophy. But who would you guys say are some of the most important figures in trying to give us this true knowledge in the way that Crowley did? We know Crowley, and if you type in magic like this, you're going to get Crowley. And some of these other subjects and some of these other people, other than potentially 𝗤𝗡𝗡 Blavatsky, are not as popular within the zeitgeist. They're popular if you're into this stuff, but they're not as popular. Crowley has transcended this. Who would you say, and who would you say transcends or should transcend that sort of essence, and why?
Israel Regardie was definitely an important figure in Western Esotericism, and also in relation to Crowley. I think that he occupies an important position in history, in the history of Western Esotericism, both as a student and early biographer of Aleister Crowley, and also he was a key figure in the preservation and dissemination of ritual magic, especially the Golden Dawn system. And Regardie met Crowley in 1928, if I remember correctly, and soon really became his personal secretary, a role that he held for approximately 4 years. And during this time, he helped with the editing and production of Crowley's writings, like, for instance, Magik in Theory and Practice and the Equinox. Also, Regardie was drawn to Crowley's synthesis of Hermetic Kabbalah, ceremonial ritual, yoga, and sexual magic, what Crowley called scientific illuminism, which Mark also mentioned earlier. And as a young man with a deep interest in Jungian psychology and Freudian psychoanalysis, Regardie was particularly intrigued by Crowley's attempt to naturalize and psychologize magical experience. But however, their relationship soured. Regardie became disenchanted with what he saw as Crowley's personal egotism, erratic behavior, and tendency towards authoritarianism from his point of view. And by 1932, Regardie had distanced himself from Thelema and never really rejoined the OTO. So he retained respect for Crowley's system and regarded the Book of the Law as a work of profound symbolic importance. But yeah, I suppose that Regardie is particularly significant, I would say, for his psychologizing lens. So his effort to reinterpret ceremonial magic through a psychological lens, something that others have done after him as well. I mean, we see that also with 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, for instance, and his view of Thelema. So in the case of Regardie, he was often drawing upon Freudian and Reichian theories. For instance, in works like The Middle Pillar and The Tree of Life, Regardie argued that magical rituals serve as techniques for psycho-spiritual integration, akin to psychoanalytic catharsis. And in this sense, he saw Crowley's system not as a dogmatic religion, but as a Western method of self-transformation, which is comparable to Jung's process of individuation. And this perspective placed him at odds with more devotional Thelemites, but aligned him with later scholars and practitioners that who interpret esoteric practices as responses to the disenchantment of modernity, and also as alternative psychotechnologies for the reintegration of the self. And also Regardie is also known for the preservation of the Golden Dawn, which is he published in 1937 a compendium of rituals, lectures, and teachings of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And these had been previously been kept secret. So this act was seen by some traditionalists as a betrayal, but Regardie justified it as an effort to save a dying tradition. And ironically, his publication made the Golden Dawn system more widely available than ever, and even inspired the post-war revival of ceremonial magic. So I would say that those are the main things that Regardie has contributed in relation to Crowley and also the Golden Dawn.
And if you were asking about more important figureheads, besides Crowley, from an Anglo-Saxon perspective, right? We always think about, again, at least Regardie, maybe Jack Parsons is a name that's touted a lot, and then maybe, I don't know, if we start going more into the witchcraft sphere, thinking about Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente. So a lot of people tend to forget that there is a lot more out there outside the Anglo-Saxon sphere that is almost as relevant, or maybe in some certain cases even more relevant, but they're not widely available because they never wrote in English, right? I'm thinking about Rudolf Steiner, big name. Gurdjieff, another big name. Giuliano Kremmerz, an Italian who wrote something.
I have a video on that, on
you have a very good video on that, absolutely. Yeah.
Nobody watches it because people don't know about Kremmerz.
We'll link to it, don't worry. Everyone watch.
No. It is generally one of the absolute best introductions on Kremmerz I've ever heard. And disclosure, I worked with the Kremmerz system as well. I was initiated not in the Miriam, in the Ordino Sirideo, at least one of the affiliations of it. So, and I was interested in Kremmerz because Kremmerz had a lot of similarities with Crowley, right? Especially if you consider the more spurious sides of it. The point I'm making is that occulture, which is this term that became very popular in the last maybe 30 years, is a lot wider than a lot of people in the Anglo-Saxon sphere imagine. And the truth is that Crowley became such a figurehead because of the 60s, because he was rediscovered by the Beatles. Let's be honest here. Crowley died in 1947 It's not true that he died, penniless, alone, dejected. That's a myth that a lot of people repeat because it's a conspiracy theories, especially maybe in certain sides of the political spectrum. You want to see the Satanist, quote unquote, dying, losing in his life, but it's not true. He died in Netherwood in Hastings, which is nearby here in London. It was basically Netherwood was sort of like a proto hippie commune. And he was, taken care of. He was visited regularly. He died with the equivalent of something like I don't know, 20 grand under his bed. It's like that. 20 grand, they're not much nowadays, but it was fine, right? When he died, he had people coming over for his. It was cremated anyway. But then he kind of disappeared from the press because also he was very much in the press for his entire life. Some would argue, Professor Richard B. Spence would argue that that was because he was a Secret Service agent his entire life, right? And so he was always flirting with the press, and he did it all his life because he was always doing disinformation techniques from what was called the Special Branch at the time. Now it's called MI5 or MI6, which is the equivalent of the CIA in the UK. This is not proven, but then again, they're not going to tell you if it was true or not. It is true that Ian Fleming, the 007 writer, which was part of the Special Branch, knew him very well and had a high regard of him.
Okay.
And when Rudolf Hess famously was captured in World War II, it was Ian Fleming that suggested that Crowley would go and speak with Hess because they were both occultists, right? They would speak the same language. But Crowley was too much in the press, in the yellow press at that point, to be passed as of something that, Churchill would agree.
Uh-huh.
But the point is that once he died, he kind of disappears from a while. And it was only when the Beatles put it on Sgt. Pepper's cover, with all the faces there, that it kind of came back. Also because in the late 70s, right? Sorry, the 60s, right? So you have the Summer of Love is coming through. And this idea that, Crowley was a libertine. He liked sex. And all of a sudden, it's the zeitgeist again. And so we never had something similar happening to anywhere else. You would argue that, of course, Gurdjieff and Steiner are very well household names, of course, but they are respectable names. They never really reached the mainstream because they never got into pop culture. So that is why you get Crowley, always pushed up. But then again, this is also why you get everybody having very, very wrong ideas about Crowley. Like, especially when you know him only from the pop culture side of things, you would think of Crowley as a hippie, right? As a liberal, as a queer, gender fluid person. He was all these things. He was also a high Tory. He was incredibly conservative in a lot of his stances, and that does come true when you read his entire corpus. And again, that's why as Thelemites we are called to realize that we cannot just hang on Crowley's words, because we have to adopt the real teachings and evolve them for the current zeitgeist. But if you ask me, like, is there anyone as maybe Jack Parsons in recent years? Thanks also to Strange Angel, which was 2 seasons that aired on CBS, I think, a couple of years ago. I consulted on that. That was fun. And I think it's great TV. People didn't like it because it gets quite convoluted at times. But maybe Jack Parsons is the one that became kind of similar to Crowley. But then again, Jack Parsons, he invented the fuel that got us to the moon. If you believe that, I do. He was an incredibly handsome man with an incredibly handsome wife, mistress, second wife. So it goes well as a picture as well. It goes well as a picture as well, right? And then again, when you read his magical papers, they're not very impressive, right? And a lot of people, think, Jack Parsons connected with Hollywood, connected with Satanism because it was Crowley. But when you read that, Parsons completely misunderstood Crowley. Like, he was trying to do things, and Crowley, we have letters of Crowley writing to another member of the orders that knew Parsons, I'm aghast at the idiocy of this loud, things like that. Crowley didn't really like Parsons very much. So I think that people like figurehead survive when they somehow they're picked up by the zeitgeist, and that happened to Crowley to some degree to Parsons. But the truth is that for those of you listening to us discussing this now, if you're interested in this subject matter, go deeper, because there is a wealth of other magicians, philosophers, hermetic philosophers that do not get the spotlight yet. Maybe it will sometime, and they're really worth your attention. And start with Angela's video on Cremers. You'll be surprised how this guy was crazy, but the good kind of crazy.
You guys have mentioned now throughout, and I mean, we have probably enough time to at least to get a primer on this, but one thing that I think floats throughout YouTube, throughout TikTok, and probably is, I'm going to assume to some degree throughout pop culture, has been misrepresented: sex magic. We haven't done a deep dive into this. I mean, it's a subject that is probably massively vast, but I'll start with you, Angela. I think it was you that first mentioned it. Where to start here? Can I get a definition? We started off with a definition of magic, but now we got to throw the word sex in before. What are we trying to do? What is it trying to achieve? What is it, and what is it not?
According to whom?
Well, Crowley has been our theme. I guess we might as well, and we'll get everybody back for the proper sex magic 10-hour podcast in order to
exactly. Yeah, that's good. No, I get it. I'm gonna give you a broad overview of sex magic then. I also have a video on my channel if people are interested. But yeah, sex magic generally refers to the use of sexual energy and erotic acts as a means to achieve spiritual, magical, and mystical goals. And within Western Esotericism, it is a practice that is rooted in the belief that the human sexual drive is not just physical, but a potent reservoir of psychic and spiritual force that can be directed, ritualized, and transmuted. And its development is closely associated with occult modernism, especially in the late 19th and 20th centuries. And although Aleister Crowley is the most widely known proponent, or one of the most widely known, the practice draws on a range of esoteric, mystical, and even tantric sources. And scholarly analyses such as those by 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗀 and 𝗪𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀 have shown the intersection of sex magic with broader cultural currents such as secularization, psychological interiority, and breakdown of Victorian moral norms. But while symbolic eros or eros has long played a role in esoteric traditions, such as the divine hierogamics of Gnosticism and alchemical symbolism of the conjunctio, the deliberate use of literal sexual acts as magical rites becomes articulated with particular clarity by certain currents. So first we have Theosophy and Tantra, because Blavatsky's secret doctrine introduced Western readers to Indian philosophies. And this includes references to Kundalini and spiritualized sexuality. And though Theosophy publicly denounced physical sex magic, it kind of helped popularize the idea of sexual energies as sacred. Then a key figure here is Paschal Beverly Randolph. He was a mixed-race American occultist that is often credited as the first modern Western teacher of sex magic. He combined Rosicrucianism with theurgical use of sexual union between spiritually bonded partners. And he highlighted love, consent, and polarity. And his teachings also significantly influenced later esoteric sexual systems, including, those derived by Crowley. Then we have the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and the OTO, which formalized sex magic as part of their initiatory systems, although I don't think that is still happening nowadays. This is something that Marco can talk about. And the OTO in particular placed sex magic at the core of its highest degrees, especially from the ninth degree upward. This is something that is reported in the scholarship around Thelema. And so Crowley did not invent sex magic, but radically expanded it within his Thelemic system, where it became central to the spiritual path. He preferred the archaic spelling magic with a K to distinguish the esoteric practice from the sage illusions. Probably some of the viewers will know, and also to underscore its alignment with the true will. So in Crowley's system, you have the orgasm, which is the magical sacrifice that was viewed as a moment of transcendence where consciousness dissolves and allows the magician to implant a magical intention, which can be sigil, desire, will, into the unconscious or into the spiritual fabric of the universe. This is something that we also see in Austin Osman's pair and later chaos magic. Then we have semen, menstrual blood, and other sexual fluids, which were regarded as potent magical substances, sort of elixirs or sacraments that were used ritually and symbolically, or even literally. Then another important figure is the Scarlet Woman and Babylon. Crowley associated the female sexual partner with the archetype of Babylon, which is a goddess of divine whoredom and sacrificial ecstasy. And sex magic with a Scarlet Woman was not only an act of magical manifestation, but a symbolic enactment of cosmic union and dissolution of ego. So in texts such as the Liber Agape and Liber Samek and private magical diaries, Crowley details rituals involving both heterosexual and homosexual acts, solo and partnered rites, masturbation, and various forms of sex magic, ranging from symbolic to explicit.
Well, that was a fantastic primer. I mean, I don't have I don't have much else to say, right? Well, something that I can add that Crowley doesn't start as a sex magician, right? Crowley starts as a ceremonial magician and as a yogin, right? Like that was his background. The pivot happens in by the early 1900s, so 1909, when he starts, where he founds his own magical order called the AA, or Argentum Astrum, at least this is the name for the public, that wanted to be really like a continuation of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which he was expelled from 9 years before. And in those 9 years, he really lives like a Buddhist, and he tries to avoid this reception of 𝗪𝗟𝗟𝗏𝗪 that happened in 1904. He tried to put it away, but then something happens in his life that he realized that he has to go there, right? So he founds the AA, and he starts experimenting with the using of sex, because again, he was aware of 𝗪𝗛𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗏, and then he was aware of possibly of the works of Kremers, right? That might or might have not had a sexomagical aspect to his own works. Many more, right? But something particular happens in 1912 when he received, famously, like the story goes, he received a visitation by this German guy called Theodor Reuss, which at the time was the main guy, like the worldwide leader of Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. Crowley was already a member of OTO at the time. He was received as a 7th degree of the OTO because he was on paper a 33 degree Freemason. That's as a regular Freemason, we do not really believe Crowley was ever a regular Freemason, but let's not go into the details of regularity and whatnot. But the point is that at the time, if you were a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, you would be the equivalent of a 7th degree OTO, and he already received this initiation, this charter, really. What happens in 1912, or 1913, in fact, is that Crowley published Book of Lies, which is one of his most fundamental mystical texts. Very, very complex text. It's a text that is, in the frontispiece, is dedicated to the Babe of the Abyss, which is a very, very high grade in the AA system, right? It's almost one of the highest, right? And so this implied that everything that's in there is a series of meditation or instructions for this very high grade, this very advanced initiate. There are some rituals in there that hint, kind of obviously, if you know where to look at sexomagical operation. Apparently, the same type of sexomagical operation that the OTO was teaching in its 8th and 9th and 11th degrees, okay? So Theodor Reuss, out of sudden, comes to London and say, hey, what are you doing? why you're posting our secret stuff? And of course, Crowley mentions, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is something that I just understood myself. I wrote about it. And that's why Theodor Reuss, very impressed, decided Crowley must become the leader of the OTO for the British Isle. And then 10 years later, in 1920, after the Veda conference, he would eventually become the worldwide leader. There's a little problem here, that Crowley stated that Theodor Reuss visited him in 1912, but Book of Lies was published in 1913. So there's no way that Theodor Reuss could have ever read Book of Lies. So is this a spurious account? Possibly. Is it possible that Crowley, was aware of these techniques that are tantric in nature, really, or at least as tantric as could have been in the early 1900s, with the information filtering through India at the time? And could it be that he decided to incorporate in his system, telemizing it, giving it a thelemic veneer? It's possible, right? What I can tell you is that in the current incarnation of the OTO, which as an ex-member, I tell you, for me, it is not Crowley's OTO. Crowley OTOs died with 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪, which was Crowley's hair, and 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 died in the 60s, and then the OTO was reactivated in the 70s by this guy, but by one guy in Brazil called Marcelo Motta, and one guy in the United States called Grady McMurtry. They didn't like each other. They fought for copyright, and Grady McMurtry won the copyright in 1985, and he died immediately after. Like the day after he won the copyright law, he died. Kind of interesting, huh? And then the Americans went on and it's reestablished the OTO, and that was the OTO that I joined, and I went through it. And as an ex-member, I can tell you, it really is a reconstruction. It's trying the best with what you have, right? But I eventually came to understand that the OTO that nowadays has lost its initiatory power in many ways, mostly because they refuse to teach sex magic. They refuse access to those higher degrees in order to control the narrative and in order to control the masses. Then again, we're talking about less than 2,000 people worldwide. So where are the masses, right? I was a treasurer here in London of one of the biggest, if not the biggest lodge, and we had 90 members, of which at any given meeting, maybe 20 would show up. So you can imagine this is the reality of the OTO. Like when you go on Reddit, when you used to go on 4chan, the OTO is this secret cabal that runs the world. Man, I wish I would tell you better stories if that was the case. It's not the case. So in many ways, remember when at the beginning of this discussion I told you that a lot of the rituals got sanitized because things change. The sex has been completely removed from the rituals of the OTO. There were always sexual innuendos, even in the lower degrees rituals. That has been completely expunged, right? And as far as I know, as far as I can tell, even in the higher degrees, there's nothing there. Everything became symbolic. So in many ways, if the OTO had a secret sauce to create a magical power, to manifest those cities we discussed before through the use of sex magic, they're certainly not using it, and they're certainly not teaching it anymore. But Crowley thought they had that. Crowley, another thing that people maybe don't know about Crowley famously in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken, once his money started to dry out, he generally published flyers where he was basically trying to sell the magical elixir, that is the commixtion of sexual fluids properly activated by sexomagic rites, because that would have been almost like elixir of long life. I can tell you that wasn't a very successful venture. And I will leave it at that.
Yeah. We're getting ready close to run out of time here, and I still have questions. We'll up to this some other time. But I am still curious of, when you mentioned this elixir of life, there was an interview that just happened with someone, and I forget his name. He's an older gentleman who was discussing the royal. It's actually quite viral right now. But I believe he's a former Freemason as well. In any case, he got onto the subject of one of the beliefs of, I'm not sure that it was the Masons. I don't actually think that it was, but it was a satanic sect and cult. This royal secret, the royal secret.
Yeah, the royal secret is an alchemical term for the elixir of long life, the stone of the philosophers. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so then that's it. And obviously that claim being, quite huge and different, whether that was coming from one's ability to garnish a long life or an almost infinite to live forever through some sort of satanic practice, either whether that was through like a harnessing energy in an almost vampiric nature through whether that's children or women or whoever, blood, different things. What have you guys found? I've one more question after this if you guys have the time for it, but this just to harp on this one really quickly. What have you guys found then to be true in that nature? Are there still then groups out there with the intent belief that they can harness immortality by engaging in some form of ceremonial magic or practice in some, what to believe of that truth? Those people going out and about trying to create that.
Yes, there are groups out there that generally believe they can extract energy from the world around them, other human beings, and by doing that, they can extend their own lifespan, or they can get richer, more successful. Do those people exist? Yes. Are these people crazy? Also, yes. That is my stance, right? As I said before, as part of my practice, I consecrate what we call the cake of lights monthly. So I mingle fluids, I put them in the oven, and then there you have the host, and then you consecrate the host on the altar, and then you eat the host. And by doing that, you are creating a Eucharist ritual. You are trying to capture a slice of the divinity into a physical edible talisman that then, once it's in your system, supports you. This is as much as I can tell you, in the sense that this is as much as I know to be true from my perspective, right? But if you ask him, are there people that believe they can do what you discuss? Yes, there are, because there are a lot of deluded people out there. There are a lot of people that are unable to understand what alchemical transmutation really means, which is something that happens inside of you. It's inside. This is like your body, or your subtle body, in fact, is the athanor. It is that furnace of the philosophers, right? You don't need the energy of anyone else, because the meaning is that you actually are able to generate and transmute the energy inside yourself, right? But again, if you're asking me, are there people that believe that? Yes, there are. I mean, famously, the Order of the Nine Angles, which is a very nasty cabal of Nazi Satanists.
What was it called? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. What is it?
The Order of the Nine Angles.
Order of the Nine.
Or it is stylized as O9A or ONA.
Okay.
It was in the news here in the UK, but also in the US, because they had like connections. They were proven connections with far right activists, like, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, whatever. It's nasty out there. Okay, and part of the beliefs of the ONA, or Order of the Nine Angles, is this idea of vampiric magic. Like by virtue of creating this elixir by using your fluids, but also the fluids of sacrificial victims, you can effectively live forever. There's a lot of psychosis out there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to become immortal via magic. I think that it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what magic does and how magic works. I don't think that. I also think that perhaps seeking immortality could be dangerous even for your spiritual path, because I think part of a lot of people's spiritual path is fueled by the knowledge that we are mortal. So, and making sense of our mortality. So if you pretend that you're going to be immortal, you're going to deprive yourself of the opportunity to make that an essential part of your spiritual growth. Because everybody is going to die. We are all going to get sick. We're all going to die. And this is really, the one truth. I think there's an Italian expression that says the one thing that the only truth I know is that we're all going to die. And so I think that it is a misunderstanding of how magic works, to be honest. And also holding on to your, wanting to be immortal, I think, is also problematic. It's like, why would you even want that? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
The level of self-importance is like beyond the roof. It's like, why would you want to be immortal anyway?
But also, like you're opening up for millennia of grief, seeing the loved ones die in front of you again and again and again. Like, why? Like, I mean, it's a delusion that feeds
the ego, as opposed to feeding the dissolution of the ego. So I think that it's very, besides being delusional and based on a fundamental misunderstanding of magic, it's also spiritually dangerous, because it's going in the opposite direction where you want to go.
Last question, if you guys have the time for one more.
Yeah. I do have one more, yeah.
Angela, as well. All right, if you're all right. It's a fairly simple one, but there are magicians throughout history that have become, let's say, quite synonymous with, truly incredible and fanciful stories, and are quite famous. And I'm thinking of, and they may not necessarily fit in the magician sphere, but the ones that I'm curious about and would be, I believe, Cornelius Agrippa, is that correct as a name? And then John Dee. Both of those figures seem, larger than life within the, what they achieved and their importance, etc. Do you guys give any sort of credence, not necessarily to just what they did, but how important their works are to maybe read? Say, should one read Cornelius Agrippa? Should one read John Dee? And then would they gain a even firmer, better understanding of magic within there?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to me is always yes. I think one of the things that I've always also promoted on my channel, because I do academic education, is that we need to study everything, even the Order of Nine Angles and Julius Evola and everybody. I think education is of utmost importance, any sort of education. I think that Agrippa and Dee definitely are particularly important. I suppose your question perhaps is like, are they essential to understand Western esotericism,
Yes.
or the way that we understand magic in our cultural milieu? And definitely yes. I mean, both Agrippa and Dee are foundational to the contemporary, to the contemporary development, the modern and contemporary development of Western learned magic. So absolutely, the three books of De Occulta Philosophia Libri Tres by Agrippa, which is the occult philosophy, and I think it's essential because in Agrippa, we find some key concepts like the tripartite cosmos, because Agrippa draws on the Neoplatonic model of the universe, which is elemental, celestial, and intellectual realms. And he links each level with a corresponding form of magic. Also, the concept of sympathy and correspondence, because all levels of reality are interconnected through analogical relationships, which allows the magician to act upon the whole by manipulating its parts. So it's really essential to obviously our conception of magic. And also the magus as a microcosm. The magician really reflects the universe and can act as its mediator through gnosis and ritual. So Agrippa's work really became a standard manual for Renaissance magicians, but he also wrote De Vanitate Scientiarum, which is on the vanity of sciences, which is a skeptical treatise that casts doubt on the very sciences that he earlier promoted. So that's also an interesting one. John Dee is also essential for understanding Crowley as well, because maybe I can let Marco elaborate more on that. But some key elements from Dee's magic system are the concept of angelic magic and Enochian magic, because between 1582 and 1589, Dee, with the help of the medium Edward Kelly, engaged in hundreds of scrying sessions to contact angels. And the result was a complex system of angelic language, which is often called Enochian, angelic hierarchies and ritual instructions. And this system was believed to be a restoration of the magical language spoken before the fall and transmitted by angels to guide human salvation. Another important aspect in this is the Monas Hieroglyphica, which is a dense alchemical and Kabbalistic treatise proposing a symbol, the Monas, that encodes the unity of all cosmic principles, planetary, elemental, and spiritual. And the glyph represents this ideal of universal synthesis. We have seen how this universal synthesis and synthesis in magical practice is quite a common theme. And also Dee really believed that mathematics was the key to understanding the divine order of creation, and his worldview combined Pythagoreanism, Christian Kabbalah, alchemy, and astrology, and he was aiming to restore the original Adamic wisdom.
I mean, once again, you said everything. Thank you. you saved. No. It's great. But something I can add, right? Like, so you were asking, like, should people read these? Should they are they going to get like a better understanding? If you're looking for more practical tips on how to do magic, maybe not, in the sense that a lot of what you find in Agrippa, there are two great editions right now, one by Eric Bertiaux and one by Paul Summers Young. So you're spoiled for choice right now on translations of Agrippa. A lot of what he suggests to do has been better codified by the more recent magic. Again, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Angela, said, highlighted some of the things we get from Agrippa, but even the concept of the four elements, right? They're so fundamental in modern magic, comes from Agrippa, right? Like that, a lot of the structure comes from him. So maybe in Agrippa you're going to find more of the theoretical backdrop for it. So whereby with Dee is absolutely fundamental for Thelema, because most of the highest mystical revelations that are found in Thelema were found through Crowley's application of the system, at least part of it, as he learned it from the Golden Dawn. And I'm saying this because the system is incredibly complex, and we have access to all of it because we have most of his diaries. I think we have actually all of his diaries that we found. And the system itself is incredibly complex, has various applications, right? The angels famously always told that the angels, I mean, those entities that Dee called angels, told him that he would never use the system, but he would basically just have to receive it and give it to posterity, right? And so we can, that's very practical. It's very complex, but it's very practical. And the aim really is connection with these entities, right? In order to start what we call angelic conversation. The famous film writer and director 𝗪𝗟𝗪𝗀𝗀 made a series of queer, famous queer movie in the 80s called The Angelic Conversation. And the queerness is really something that's very fundamental to understanding the Enochian entities, because they're very other than human, okay? And, from connecting with them, we can have ideas, we can think of things we would never think on our own, right? But as I was saying, like through Crowley, using this, at least one part of the Enochian system called the keys, basically the Enochian keys, he received the vision, what eventually end up being recorded as the vision and the voice, very long, very poetic, very visionary text that is one of the key mystical texts of Thelema. Babylon, that we mentioned before, appears first time in the vision and the voice. In the Book of the Law, 𝗏𝗏 says that she will be known by a secret name, and that name is Babylon, is revealed in the vision and the voice. There's more we can say, really, how many more hours do you have, right? But the point is that some modern practitioners, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, I'm thinking about him mostly, consider the idea that the Enochian system was a system of a complete magical system that would usher in a new era. Okay, in many ways, it would usher in the apocalypse, the end of the previous system, and the beginning of something else. Apocalypse from the Greeks means a revelation, so a revelation of a new era. And from a Thelemic perspective, that has happened because, this era had started in 1904 with the reception of the Book of the Law. And in 1909, in the late early 1900s, through the reception of the vision and the voice and the communication of Babylon, we have started this new era. In many ways, the Enochian system was received by Dee to be used by Crowley.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure no academic will ever agree with me on this because there's not enough evidence that was the deal. But this is the mythopoetic framework that Thelema works upon. So I would suggest people to read Dee because there's a lot of interesting insights. Consider, this man was a very, very, very prominent man in the court of Elizabeth I.
Right.
He was the original 007. Almost like we go back to Ian Fleming with Justice. He would sign himself as 007 because he was a spy for Elizabeth I. But he was also an alchemist. He was also a magician, right? And so he was a very prominent character that he had lived an incredible life, and he had a lot of things to say. So I would suggest them, read Dee. It's fun stuff in there.
So listen, obviously we could go forever and ever and ever, but we'll get it here, which I think is perfect because I think this gives anyone who's watching this and looking at this enough in order to then go off on their own. I mean, like we said, you guys, we will leave all of your guys' links to books, to shows, etc., down below in the description, or if you're listening to this, obviously it'll be in the show notes. I really, really, really appreciate this. I think it would be wonderful, honestly, to do something live at some point in person. I think people would really enjoy that, and we can go a little bit longer and maybe even get some stuff up there because there's such great symbolism and things like that. It'd be great to have you guys explaining things. I think that would be great for everyone. So we'll look to do that. But other than that, listen, I really appreciate it to both of you guys, and looking forward to the next time.
Thank you so much, Will, for inviting us.
Of course.
Love this. Thank you so much.